So today we're doing our Civics 101 on your vote and the justice system. When we think about the justice system or the concept of what is just, right? We have this idea of like being morally right. But our justice system, there are people who decide what is just. There are people who do that in the laws that they write and how they interpret the laws, and how they make decisions about whether or not someone so the bottom line is it's really important to make our voices heard across all three branches of government. So, with our justice system, there is the judicial branch is an area where we can have our voices be heard, just like we do with the executive branch when we vote for president or mayor, just like we do with the legislative branch with city council, or with our state House of Representatives or Congress. So I wanted to share with you all something that I saw on my own Twitter feed that I thought was really interesting. And it has to do with kind of like directly thinking about this moment. What does voting have to do with George Floyd, right? So on my Twitter feed, this tweet came up. And we're not so much focused on the first sentence about rioting works, right? But mostly we're focused on this person and the 500,000 people we can presume agree that the charging of an officer wasn't achieved by voting. And we're not bringing up, at Citizen Detroit, as in our role as an organization, we're not taking the time to dive into like legal questions of this. We're just saying, the idea that what happened had nothing to do with voting. However, the charges and the way in which this case is being prosecuted comes through an attorney general. And that attorney general is an elected position. So Keith Ellison became the lead prosecutor here at the invitation of the county. And this elected position now plays a key role in what happens next. And another thing that's interesting is that Keith Ellison won that position with 49% of the vote over the lead opposition at 45%. So when we think about this whole thing, and he was elected last year. He was seated last year, I should say. So last year's an odd year. So when we think about our vote and the long-term impact and how we plan for the future in terms of looking at our candidates and thinking about what roles they play and how it can shape the future. Folks who were voting in this moment weren't thinking about a specific instance that might happen in 2020. And yet that vote had a huge impact on what's happening right now today. And so it's really important, again, when we think about the influence of our vote on the justice system. And today we're going to talk about what are those elected roles. We have a lot of them on the ballot this year, both in our primary election in August and in our general election in November. And so we're going to go through those. But first, Vasily is going to take over the screen share and talk about the big picture of the justice system and elections. So I'm going to stop my share so that he can share and take over the slides.
Hi, everybody. Can everyone hear me all right? And can they see my slides without my notes?
Yep.
All right. So I just wanted to go over, well, my name is Vasily Jacobs. I'm a senior policy analyst here at Citizen Detroit. I'm not a lawyer, but I care deeply about this issue and have kind of tracked it for a while now. You really, if you've paid attention to the police videos that have come out in, for the last 5-6 years, then you've been captivated by what has been some pretty severe behavior leading to the death of a lot of Black men. It's a difficult thing. So it's captivated me like many other people. And I wanted to share with you guys tonight our sprawling U.S. justice system and pare it down to 3 different areas so you can better get kind of a grasp on where it connects with us as citizens and where it connects with, let's say, suspects or defendants or people through the process, and how your vote obviously impacts the U.S. justice system. So here, looking at this diagram that I put together, look at the black labels at the top are kind of the headers and titles of the 3 main systems, and I'll go over them briefly, starting here on the bottom left with, basically we're a nation of laws, and the justice system revolves around the law. And in the bottom left here, our leaders create our laws, and they create ordinances, and ordinances are local laws. You may hear from city council sometimes about a resolution. That's more of a statement, more of a proclamation. An ordinance is actually a local law. So many of our leaders create laws, and they also put fundamentals behind our budgets. They put money and emphasis in certain areas behind our budgets. Now, laws are not just about crimes and what we break. They're also about our rights. They're also about the powers we have, whether under the Bill of Rights or other constitutional amendments, or even under consumer protection laws, let's say, that we have at the state level. So there are plenty of leaders that we elect on the left-hand side here. Some of them we don't elect in gray. They're like the U.S. Sentencing Commission. But these are places that we can affect law and ordinance creation. And I'll get more specific into each of these 3 areas in a bit. Let me just do a quick overview. If you look up to the top here at the laws that we enforce, this is where plenty of us are probably here today for this reason. And this is the approach with citizens, the approach with possible suspects, the engagement of enforcing our laws at contact with people. This is the use of weapons, home raids, arrests for citations, things like that. But it also includes at trial and what our prosecutor may bring in terms of charges, in terms of approach, in terms of plea bargains at trial. And in addition, our jails, where people are held before their final trial and final verdicts, but can be held in our jails, in our Wayne County Jail. Lastly, if you switch around to the bottom right here, you'll see this is the area of correcting lawbreakers and quote unquote like justice, final judgments and the aftermath and the sentencing that happens from our court systems, whether it be fines, whether it be the prison system that people get entered into after final judgments, whether it be rehabilitation and restriction. So you see on the left there again are the parts of our government that affect this system. And our votes can influence those parts of government. So this diagram doesn't encompass everything. Not everything can be put in a neat box when it comes to our justice system. It's interlinked. For example, a lot of the laws that are written maybe by the people we elect are finally decided by judges who compare those laws to our constitutions, the federal constitution or our state constitution. So a lot of judges ultimately decide and clarify the law, or what a prosecutor does has to be signed off on. Like a plea bargain has to be signed off on by a judge. So you see the way that the laws are interpreted by prosecutors and used by prosecutors is also signed off on by judges. So these are all interlinked, and there's other areas that I'll get into a little bit. Let me go to the next slide here. So your vote influences law creation. And on the left here are some of these bodies that we vote on. And the ones in bold, those are the ones we're voting on this year. Okay, whether it be August 4th and on that Tuesday our primary, or whether it be in November on the 3rd and our general election then. So you see city council and the mayor are not being voted on this year. Those are odd years for our local elections. It'll be next year. And then you have the county commission and state legislature, U.S. Congress, and the U.S. president will be voted on this year. So I just want to get a little bit into the law creation here. And what are some of the laws related to policing and other that have affected us in Detroit? Well, a big one that's being discussed actually at the city council right now, at least as of 7 weeks ago or 10 days, facial recognition software. And this is new advanced software that can scan thousands of photos of people and link them to an image that may be captured from a camera by Detroit Police Department. So it's a very advanced system of facial recognition, but it's been shown to have problems, particularly with African Americans, in identifying them and maybe picking the wrong guy, the wrong female or man that might be a suspect in a crime. So that's at the city council level right now. After a 2-year approval for the software, that's being discussed right now at city council. And then there's, smaller laws that are still meaningful, like the dog ordinance on what animal control can do. There's the animal control, it's dog ordinance that we've had some vicious dogs, unfortunately, kill some toddlers and children. City council can cover ordinances that give animal control more power. When you're looking at the mayor, obviously, there's a big importance at the mayor with creating laws, more so on the executive level, okay? I didn't talk about it yet, but there are executive decisions and executive orders, I should say, that the president does at the Wayne County executive does that is also law. Now, it's not as strong or codified as law that runs through a legislature and gets approved by the executive branch. Their executive orders are more easy come, easy go, and they cannot run afoul of current law as it is. So the mayor can get involved on those kinds of things. The county commission, again, that we're voting on, they are so important to our county jail here in Wayne County. And they can create ordinances around jail size, how many beds it houses, how many people are in each cell. And I don't know if you remember, but just recently they unfortunately wasted $150 million on a failed jail site. They're currently building a new jail, and this new jail has 160 beds for juveniles. So the question is, do we need beds for juveniles before their trial, before their hearing, to keep them in jail? And so there's 160 beds there. And the county commission sets the budget for the sheriff. So the sheriff, Misha is going to get deep into the Wayne County Sheriff, but again, when we're talking about influencing laws, we can talk also about budget priorities, and the county commission sets the budget for the sheriff, who runs the jails, largely runs the jails. The state legislature here will be voting on primary in August and the final vote in November. Big thing I came across was employment restrictions for felons in Michigan. So there are restrictions. About 200 occupations require a license in Michigan. 70% of them have this good moral character clause. And a licensing board has a wide latitude on blocking, denying someone a license under this good moral clause, and they're denying a lot of felons licenses because of this. Felons that maybe have a felony around a job, around an aspect that's unrelated to the job. So this includes being a licensed painter, a licensed roofer, even medical care jobs. It includes a lot of different jobs. And so the governor's trying to link up the licensing department a little bit more for some of the jobs that even our prisons are training inmates for. So if you learn a new skill in our prisons and you get out and you can't get a job because of these restrictions on licensed jobs in Michigan, that needs to be fixed. To many people, that they believe that needs to be fixed. To some, they say, listen, carry that burden in your life as being a felon throughout your life, I should say. Now, real quick, there's a bill in progress at the state legislature. Senator Irwin from Ann Arbor's got a bill right now that's passed the state Senate, and it deals with policing and making sure every police officer takes part in anti-bias training, mental health training, and de-escalation training. So new training for police officers top down in Michigan. Some departments already do that kind of training, but they're allowed to not do it as well. This bill would change that, but this is a bill, not a law. So let's see here. U.S. Congress is big on laws. The Fair Sentencing Act, we may have remembered, where 5 grams of crack cocaine and 500 grams of cocaine were sentenced at the same level. Well, that was fixed by the Fair Sentencing Act. And then the president and U.S. Congress, obviously, they're big into laws and influence. One issue, and we can share this data point, the FBI just started collecting information on police use of force nationwide. It's been a 5-year project, and we got the link to that data if you want to take a look at it. Obviously, the president, Congress, the president particularly picks Supreme Court justice nominees too, so that's a big deal. And I included on here the initiative and the referendum. We're not voting on any, I think, non-millage items this year, but in 2018, we did create new laws and new constitutional amendments around redistricting and voters' rights, and a new law on legalizing marijuana. So, all right, let's go to the next slide here. Your vote influences law enforcement and prosecution. So this is where, how do we approach citizens? What kind of weapons do we approach with citizens, with suspects? What kind of raids do we do? Well, the Detroit Police Commission, you can vote on at least one member of the Detroit Police Commission. 7 are voted on here in Detroit, and they line up with our city council districts. It's an 11-member board, so 4 are appointed by the mayor. So the mayor is important to this process because he or she appoints 4 of the Detroit Police Commission members, but they do have to be signed off on by city council. So right now at the Detroit Police Commission, they meet tomorrow at 3 p.m., the Detroit Police Commission, and feel free to take part in those meetings on Zoom. They are looking at 16 different adjustments to their use of force. So this is, if you're talking about George Floyd, if you're talking about Tamir Rice, if you're talking about Eric Garner, if you're talking about Walter Scott, if you're talking about any of these individuals, unfortunately on this video, if you're talking about Philando Castile, you can talk about use of force, and there's 16 new adjustments to the Detroit PD being discussed right now at the Police Commission. No-knock raids is another way of enforcing the law. We had our own story here 10 years ago with Ayanna Jones, the young 4-year-old who was killed. Maybe some of our younger attendees don't remember this, but she was killed in a no-knock raid, a 4-year-old girl in 2010. We all know the story of Breonna Taylor right now in Kentucky, who was an EMS worker. A no-knock raid killed her, and it was the wrong address. They shouldn't have been at her house. So further on, the county prosecutor is so big to how we enforce our laws. Plea bargains are huge now. Rarely when someone's charged with the crime, rarely does it go through the entire trial process. Upwards of 90% of people with charges plea out, they plea bargain. And so the county prosecutor has wide discretion there, and usually the judge will sign off on it pretty easily from the research that I've done. So what is our county prosecutor doing on plea bargains? What do they look like? What crimes are they being charged with? That's a big deal. The jails, what kind of conditions are in our jails? We talked about the Wayne County Sheriff who runs the jail system. What are our conditions there? Unfortunately, Macomb County, 20 people have died in the jails there in the last 8 or so years. That's much worse than Wayne County and Oakland County, and those are 20 lives up there affected. The President, the Department of Justice, the State Attorney General, again, more offices. Well, excuse me, you can vote for the President, obviously, and he or she has strong influence on the Department of Justice, but you do vote directly for the State Attorney General and the President as well. So what kind of crimes are they pursuing? What kind of charges are they pursuing? That's a big issue in law creation. Law enforcement. Where is the Department of Justice researching crime? One big thing is that the Department of Justice had a consent judgment with Detroit PD from 2003 to 2016. So, fortunately, we haven't had a lot of bad videos of what's going on the streets with policing here in Detroit. But one could maybe point to the fact that the Department of Justice was overseeing the Detroit Police Department from 2003 to 2016 because of excessive force and unlawful arrests. So they are not under that anymore, though. Our vote influences rulings, corrections, and justice. So this is that final verdict, that final judgment, sentences in the prison system. Are we jailing people for nonviolent offenses? That's a question a lot of people are wondering. Should we jail people for driving on a suspended license? The state of Michigan came out with the Michigan Joint Task Force on jail and pre-trial incarceration. So this is what happens to you before you go through the full trial. There's a great report on it. It came out in January. We shared it in the link, so do check it out. All the leaders, a lot of the leaders in the state came together on it. Driving without a license, 17% or more people charged with driving without a license stay a week or more in jail. 17% of them stay a week or more in jail for driving without a license. So is that happening at 36th District Court? I'm not sure. I haven't done the research. Not sure on that. There's a report by Vera Institute of Justice just recently on 36th District. It said that it found 53% of jail bookings are for low-level misdemeanor ordinance violations, and it cost the jail and Wayne County taxpayers, us, $93 million. So there are some direct facts around it. Okay. Lastly, the Third Circuit Court is a higher up jail and a higher up court, and Misha's going to discuss that a little bit more. But some issues around that you can consider when voting for judges in the Third Circuit is, the state defender's office there has not gotten an increase in the budget for 16 years. This was a study by the Sixth Amendment Center. So people, state defenders who are working with folks that don't have the money to hire a lawyer, had not seen an increase in 16 years. So the budget is putting pressure on them, and is that Third Circuit judge asking for more money in that area of the Wayne County Commission, because the Wayne County Commission will ultimately decide that. Parole boards is a big deal. How are we meeting face-to-face with people found guilty, with inmates on getting out early? Are laws setting them up to allow parole? And, just a few facts on our prison system. Right now in the state, we have 38,000 to 39,000 prisoners. It has been going down since 2007 or so, but it had a big increase to get to that point in 2007. So this is our justice system, and this is one portion of it. I'm going to wrap up here with the voting rights of people that are affected by the justice system, just so we're clear on that, because there are 11 states indefinitely that deny voting rights to felons. You may have heard issues of that in Florida, I believe it is, and in other states. Can you vote in Michigan as a felon? Yes, you can. Can you vote in Michigan when you're in trial? Yes, you can. Can you vote when you are in jail awaiting trial? Yes, you can. Can you vote in prison? No, you can't. That's the one hang up of voting here in Michigan, but otherwise you can do that. All right, guys, I talked a lot here. Hopefully I did an okay job of breaking down the three areas of the justice system and kind of understanding where they operate and where they affect us as citizens and people in confinement and those found guilty as well, where our laws sit. Appreciate the time. I'm going to kick it over to Misha here to take over.
So Vasily took us through the big picture, right? It's called a system for a reason. There are lots of different moving parts. They are connected. They have influence over one another. You can participate in them in different areas. I'm gonna zoom in to who's on the ballot this year. And when I say this year, I mean both in our primary and in our general election. We have folks on the ballot that have influence over this system, that make these decisions, and that we as voters have an opportunity to influence, right? So I'm gonna zoom into who they are and what they do in those roles. And we're gonna start with the Wayne County Sheriff. So the sheriff leads Wayne County Sheriff Department. If you are driving around town and you're thinking about the different kinds of law enforcement vehicles, we know the bright blue is Michigan State Police. Detroit Police Department has a variety of cars. We know the ones that have like the city on the side. So the sheriff cars are the ones that are kind of brown and yellow. They have the yellow stripes on the side. And they are responsible for all of the county. It's the primary law enforcement agency for the county. The county sheriff, whom you could think of kind of like a police chief, but for this particular organization, serves for 4 years. And the current sheriff, who's been sheriff for a while now, is Benny Napoleon. Now, when we think about how the sheriff's department or how the sheriff's office is broken down and does its work, there's a field operations division. Those are the folks who are out, on the street, so to speak, who are doing investigations. There's the court division, so connected to the courts and how we take an alleged crime all the way through a system. The jail division, training center, and then their budget also is going to cover administrative expenses like hiring and personnel practices. Those things are important because who is hired, the process they go through to be hired, right? That's all stuff that comes from a budgeting process. And when we think about personnel practices, you're talking about kind of complaints, discipline, required training for different positions and roles, required education, all those kinds of things are coming through this Wayne County Sheriff budget. Other responsibilities that are coming from the Wayne County Sheriff, managing streets and highway patrols, securing county jails and court buildings. So if you're ever in a county court, you might see members of the Sheriff's Department around just, checking things out, making sure things are all good. Issuing accident reports, serving legal papers, background checks. Our CCWs, so the concealed weapon permits, go through the county sheriff's office. If you have a registered pistol, you drop that license off at the local police department, but the CCW permit is coming through the county. Personal protection orders, mortgage foreclosures and sales. The Sheriff's Department supports Friend of the Court, which is a program connected to the Third Circuit that helps with guardianship issues and home supervision with families, and then neighborhood watch programs. So the difference between a local neighborhood watch program, or it's all local, but the difference between like a neighborhood watch program that is right there in your community compared to the county sheriff is you can actually register with the county sheriff and you have access to other resources and support. And this is a photo of Benny Napoleon. So for everyone who's currently serving these seats, if we had photos available, we want to make sure we provided those for you. However, again, Benny Napoleon is on the ballot this year. It is a partisan role, so there will be a primary as well as a general election for the county sheriff. So other things you might not think of with the county sheriff that are part of that field operations division. They also have an internet crimes unit, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a couple examples. There's an internet crimes unit, so a forensic computer analysis team that investigates web predators and internet scammers. And there's also a Marine unit that works with the Detroit Police Department, the Coast Guard, the Windsor Police to respond to emergencies along the waterfront. So that's our Wayne County Sheriff. And again, if we think back to Vasily's kind of system diagram where he had our top level, like how we engage with individuals in the community, with citizens, that's where we're at, the Wayne County Sheriff. And then we move on to the Wayne County Prosecutor. So the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, also a partisan role, also a role that will have a primary as well as a general election. The Prosecuting Attorney's Office, this is the chief law enforcement official and representing government in courts. So the way I like to think about this person is, for anyone who watches Law and Order, and you've got your ADAs and you've got your DAs. Or, if you're watching the cast, your ADAs are for us, would be assistant prosecuting attorneys, and the DA would be the prosecuting attorney. So our current prosecutor, Kim Worthy, who is at the end of a 4-year term and will be on the ballot this year, has 180 assistant prosecuting attorneys, 24 investigators, and 70 clerical and non-lawyers that support this whole process. So if you were in court, you might not ever see Kim Worthy. You might see one of these 180 assistant prosecuting attorneys whom Kim Worthy is responsible for supervising, for hiring, for proposing a budget to support, all those kinds of things. So other roles, or the specific roles of the Wayne County Prosecutor, reviewing, authorizing, and prosecuting violations of felony and misdemeanor Michigan criminal laws and Wayne County ordinances. That's a mouthful. We wanted to make sure we shared it as it's written officially. The bottom line is that if a misdemeanor or a felony occurs in Wayne County, it is the prosecutor's job to represent the government in seeing the prosecution of that crime through. So when someone has, allegedly committed a crime and they end up in court in violating the laws of, the land, so to speak, the government now becomes kind of the person on the opposing side in court, and that the prosecuting attorney represents that role. They authorize and prosecute felony and misdemeanor juvenile delinquency offenses as well. So the way that alleged crimes are handled for adults and for juveniles is a little different. The potential penalties are a little different. The prosecutor is working on both cases with adults and cases with juveniles. The prosecutor also, beyond alleged crimes, works on delinquency, juvenile delinquency, parental neglect, and appeals in the Court of Appeals and the Michigan Supreme Court. And then finally, when we think about mental health challenges, so sometimes the initial response to an issue is as if a crime has been committed, and then we discover that there's a mental health challenge there. So that will go through a different kind of court proceeding. And depending on the hearing and whether or not there's a lot of contention around it, the Wayne County Prosecutor might have a role there as well. One of the things that's really important about this role is that the prosecutor makes decisions to charge or not charge in a variety of cases. So when we start with a police officer or a county sheriff, arresting someone and saying, here's the crime that I believe I saw or experienced, right? The prosecutor is responsible for reviewing that information and making a determination as to whether or not to actually bring charges. Did a crime actually occur? Is this accurate? Or, does it meet a threshold to come to court? All those kinds of things. And so some examples have, a Grosse Pointe School parent-teacher officer was charged with embezzling. A recent activist was released without charges from the recent protests because it was after further investigation to determine a crime had not been committed. And then also from protests, there was a man who drove his car in the crowd, and after reviewing the information, it was determined to bring charges for trying to run over police officers. So you can see from these various headlines how there are some cases where charges are brought and there are some cases where they are not after information is reviewed. So that is our Wayne County Sheriff, that is our Wayne County Prosecutor. Again, those are two partisan roles. And now we're going to get into the courts and the nonpartisan roles. So judges at every level are on the 2020 ballot. And when we say on every level, it's because our system of courts is a hierarchy. There are lower courts, there are intermediate courts, there are higher courts. And from the bottom up, there is more power as you go to the top court. So our local courts, which are the 36th district, the 3rd Circuit, and the probate, and the 36th district is Detroit, whereas the 3rd Circuit and probate is Wayne County. They have certain domain and jurisdiction. The State Court of Appeals is an intermediate court, has more power than those local courts and can overturn their decisions. And then above them, the highest court in our state, the state Supreme Court, can overturn decisions of the appeal court of the Court of Appeals, can overturn decisions of the local courts. Oh, that's really how that happens, because it normally flows up through a system. Judges can sometimes be the most confusing folks on the ballot, at least in my experience and from what I hear from other folks. So we just wanted to start a little bit with some information about candidacy. So one, they must be qualified electors, registered voters. They must be licensed to practice law in Michigan for at least 5 years. And judges have to be under 70 years of age at the time of election. Another component that's important to this is that each court has a chief judge, which is an appointed position, and that person is the head of the court. So the chief judge is appointed by the state Supreme Court. We'll talk about how the state Supreme Court does their thing on another slide. And they're the lead judicial administrative officers. So just off that, you can tell how our vote for state Supreme Court influences the lower courts. When we look at judicial campaigns, if you get mailers from judges who are running for office, I'm sure you notice that they are different in content compared to other elected officials. They have different information. They have less information in some ways. And a lot of that is connected to some rules about how judges can run for office. So we're just gonna go through some of those that you know what you're looking at, and you kind of have an idea of how you're being engaged in the issue. So one, unlike other offices, judges who are incumbents, and that means judges who are currently serving, automatically are designated as incumbents on the ballot. So other folks, when they run for office, they have to appeal for designations. And usually you only get it if there's someone on the ballot with the same last name. But with judges, automatically it lists you as an incumbent. When it comes to campaign finance and raising money, judges can't personally ask for campaign money or accept it, but an authorizing committee of the judges choosing can do that. So, unlike other offices and candidates where you might get a personal phone call from them or a text where they're asking for a donation, with judges, they can't do that. They cannot personally ask for or accept dollars. If a candidate runs unopposed, then all campaign funds that aren't used during the campaign should be returned to the original donors. And a lot of these issues that we're going through here has to do with trying to maintain the impartial position of judges. So, not being influenced by money, not being influenced by organizations. Humans are humans, but these are kind of the rules that guide this particular role given what they do in courts. So a candidate also cannot speak on behalf of a political party. They also cannot be a member of that party while in office, but they are able to contribute to political parties. So, if you're in an area where maybe it's a little less clear how judges are affiliated and that's something you're interested in, and you got access to, lists of political contributions for some reason, you can kind of dig through those things. That's the kind of stuff that we see in like the big headline news, right? Folks are like digging through all the finances. A candidate for judge can't make pledges, promises, or commitments about conduct in office that are inconsistent with impartial performance. So again, part of the role demands that a judge sits and hears a case from an impartial position. And so unlike other candidates, you're not gonna get mailers from them that say, I will do X, Y, Z. You know, you'll get a message that says, I will be impartial, because that is what they are required to do. And then finally, there is a rule that judges have to end their legal firm or organizational memberships after they join or are elected to office. So they can't be both an elected judge and a member of a firm. So those are some of the guidelines around the candidacy of judges. And now we're going to dive into the actual courts, their jurisdiction, kind of what the judges do. So we're going to start with our local courts and work our way up to our highest court. And within our local courts, we're going to start small with our Detroit court, the 36th District Court, which is actually, it's connected to the city of Detroit through our city charter. And so there's a council committee, a city council committee that discusses the operations of the 36th District Court, and that's the Internal Operations Committee of Council. And we'll give you some information about their meetings a little later. So the 36th District Court is the largest district court in the state, and it's one of the busiest in the country. Because so many people come in contact with this court regularly, it's sometimes called the People's Court. It has 28 judges, 5 magistrates, and 5 operating divisions. Judges serving in the 36th District Court serve for 6-year terms. On this upcoming ballot, there are 9 incumbent judges and 2 judges running for partial terms. The chief judge of the 36th District Court is the Honorable William C. McConaughey. Now, I'm gonna just give you a little information about magistrates here. I don't know about you, when I hear magistrate, I think of like England, like an old UK movie or something, right? So a magistrate in this situation is someone who is appointed by the 36th District Court judges. The 36th District Court can't have more than 6 magistrates. And in a lot of ways, what they do is help with kind of the bottlenecking of cases. So they have jurisdiction to take on certain cases and certain activities as magistrates. The activities include things like issuing arrest or search warrants, dealing with arraignment. It has to do with accepting guilty pleas, imposing sentences, setting bail and accepting bonds. And then the areas in which they can do these activities include civil infraction cases, small claims proceedings, so small claims meaning small amounts of money. They also can impose sentences for dog violations, so like kind of like the ordinance Vasily mentioned earlier about vicious dogs, gaming, traffic, motor carrier, snowmobiles, you know, for all of our snowmobiles around town, and boat law violations. Magistrates also perform marriage ceremonies. So on one hand, I don't want to call them junior judges because I think that is probably misleading, but they take on a component of this work and are appointed by judges. So every time we elect our 36th District Court judge, we also are electing folks who have the power to appoint these magistrates. And the place where you might see the most is actually with traffic violations and traffic tickets. And if you've been in traffic court, you know that often there's a lot of discretion that's used in terms of what happens next and what you're held accountable for. So these are folks who still have a good amount of power. So when we look at the role of 36th District Court judge, the jurisdiction is over the following matters in the city of Detroit. So and these are the official terms: general civil, which means lawsuits seeking damages up to $25,000. Landlord tenant, disputes in those areas. Small claims I mentioned earlier, so small claims is up to $6,000, and criminal misdemeanors. So that is the 36th District Court, just Detroit, and it is connected to our City of Detroit government in certain ways, and therefore is connected to City Council's work. Now we move up to the county. We'll start with the Third Circuit Court. And this is the court that handles family and certain criminal and civil matters. So essentially, criminal matters and civil matters that go beyond the 36th District Court move up to the Third Circuit Court. And on our ballot, there are 15 incumbents who are running, 6 non-incumbents, and 1 person running for a partial term. These partial terms just have to do with folks who maybe leave the bench early, leaving a vacancy. And then the Third Circuit Court term, judges would serve for 6 years. The Chief Judge of the Third Circuit Court is Honorable Timothy M. Kinney. There are 58 judges and 3 operating divisions. If you're on Zoom or Facebook, you can see this photo of all 58 judges right there. And then in terms of their jurisdiction, the civil matters, like I said, that's going greater than $25,000. So 36th District Court, under $25,000. Third Circuit Court, above $25,000. And these can include things like medical malpractice, personal injury, auto negligence, and employment discrimination happens in the Third Circuit Court. Also, whereas misdemeanors happen in the 36th District, at the Third Circuit, felony cases and felony cases are tried, and criminal case appeals also happen at the Third Circuit Court. And then finally, the Third Circuit Court has jurisdiction over what's called family matters. And these are cases that have to do with the home, with domestic cases with families and children. So that's broken out into 2 areas: family domestic, which is, divorces, paternity, if you need a personal protection order, emancipation of minors, things like that. Name changes. And then family juvenile goes back to like that juvenile delinquency, child abuse and neglect, adoption and guardianship. And this is where that friend of the court program lives, is within the Third Circuit Court. The National Center for State Courts has actually cited the Third Circuit Court as one of the model urban courts in the United States for case flow management and the timely disposition of the court's docket, meaning that they move through their cases in a timely manner. All right, our third and final lower court is the Wayne County Probate Court. And this has 6 judges and 4 operating divisions. The judges here serve for 6 years, and on our ballot, there are 3 incumbents who are running. The Probate Court Chief Judge is the Honorable Freddie G. Burton, Jr. And the Probate Court's jurisdiction operates in 3 areas. One is wills, estates, and trusts. And that means that, as a living person, I can have my will protected by the probate court. Also, if someone has passed away and there's an issue with how that will is being administered, or if someone wants to challenge the will, that happens in probate court. Probate court also appoints guardians and conservators for legally incapacitated minors and adults. Conservators can make decisions about people's property and money. And then finally, going back to that mental health consideration that I mentioned earlier, the probate court handles cases under the mental health code. So involuntary mental health treatment, which could be hospitalization, but could also be outpatient programs, that happens in probate court. And then guardianship proceedings for individuals with developmental disabilities. So those are our 3 lower courts. And then we move on up to the intermediate court, which is the State Court of Appeals. And the State Court of Appeals is primarily concerned with challenges to decisions of the lower courts. So, you are unhappy with the outcome of a lower court decision, you think that it is unjust, and you can appeal at the state court of appeals level. The judges there have 6-year terms, and there are 3 appellate court judges on the ballot this year. The chief judge, the current chief judge, is the Honorable Christopher M. Murray. Now, appeals may seem pretty straightforward, but in terms of how the approach they take to considering appeals, the 24 judges of the appellate court first are elected from 4 geographical areas. So the state is split up into 4 areas, and the 24 judges are elected from those areas. As they review cases, they do this on panels of 3 in 3 different areas. So there's a panel in Detroit, a panel in Grand Rapids, and a panel in Lansing. Each of them is reviewing cases during the allotted time that they do that. And those 24 judges are rotating on and off of those panels so that there are different combinations of judges reviewing cases at any given time. Once a panel makes a decision that is controlling statewide, so again, if they choose to overturn the decision of a lower court, then the lower court has to respect that decision. If they uphold it, then it's upheld, it's done. And further appeal goes through the Michigan Supreme Court. Now, they primarily appeal decisions from circuit or probate courts, and so are those county courts. If another lower court a decision wants to be brought before the appeals court, then you have to submit an application, which has to be approved by the court to even review. Now, once a case is presented to the panel, they decide whether you do it by application or you bring it forth from the county. They still decide whether or not they will review, and then they decide if an appeal will be granted. So when we think about some of the issues that might come up, the Court of Appeals sided recently on the case of Enbridge with Line 5. When we changed our constitution for our redistricting commission, there were individuals that wanted to challenge that. The appeals court said it would not hear cases questioning the redistricting reforms. And then also recently, the other day, a teenager was granted an appeal in a case based on information being mispresented or misrepresented in the original case. So appeals occur at lots of different levels. Sometimes, again, the original decision's upheld, and sometimes an appeal is granted. Lastly, appeals court does sometimes hear original actions. When we say original actions, it means there has not been a first decision yet. And it usually has to do with the function of government. So recently, this happened in Dearborn Heights. City Council and the mayor ended up in court over an issue that the mayor vetoed and council brought back, and then he vetoed it again. And so they were in this lawsuit for more than 16 months at the appellate court level. And so that's an example of how those original actions from a government standpoint can come through there. All right, that was our one intermediate court. And so now we're going to our highest court, the state Supreme Court. So the state Supreme Court is a little different from the other ones when we think about candidacy. Candidates from the state Supreme Court are actually nominated by political parties, but then they're elected on a nonpartisan ballot. And you'll remember from our candidate requirements that judges can donate to a political party, but they can't be a member. So it's interesting, this process that the parties go through to nominate Supreme Court judges and then for them to be elected on a nonpartisan ballot. If there's a vacancy for some reason, it's filled by appointment of the governor until the next general election. And so that process is kind of similar to what we're used to seeing with the president and the US Supreme Court in terms of making appointments. However, at the next general election, voters again have the decision about who that state Supreme Court justice will be. So this highest court in Michigan has 7 justices. They serve for 8-year terms. And our one person on the ballot is an incumbent who also happens to be the current Chief Justice, the Honorable Bridget McCormick. The Supreme Court also selects its Chief Justice different from the others. The 7 justices elect a Chief Justice every 2 years. And then this again is the body that appoints Chief Justices in the lower courts. So when we go through their process, this is the court of last resort. So I've tried everything else, and now I'm here. The Supreme Court, according to their website, receives over 2,000 applications every year for appeals, and primarily seeking review of decisions by the Michigan Court of Appeals. The Michigan Supreme Court has the discretion to choose which cases they want to hear or don't or will not hear. And they say that they prioritize cases of great complexity and great public import. So cases that need this process of having an oral argument and further briefing, and cases that might have large implications for our state more broadly. The cases, they operate on kind of like a fiscal year, where it's from August 1st to July 31st of the next year that they review cases and make decisions. They hear oral arguments in October, actually, but start taking those applications. Again, they're looking at them starting in August and going through July of the next year. In terms of the decisions, they can come to a decision and just have an order declaring their decision, or they could have a written opinion. They could do it with or without a written opinion. So when we follow things about the US Supreme Court, a lot of times we hear folks reading from the written opinion of a justice. This just means that the Michigan Supreme Court, you might get a written opinion, you might not, as they come to their decision. And then the last thing, just to double back, when that application for them to review a case, each justice is responsible for reviewing those cases and determining whether or not that leave should be granted. So each justice is reviewing and making decisions, and that makes the election of each justice that much more important. And then the other component that makes this role really important that you might not know is that the state Supreme Court is actually responsible for the general administrative supervision of all courts in the state. And the Supreme Court establishes rules for practice and procedures in all courts. So it's really like the head administrator for all of our state courts, which makes it another critical role and an interesting body to think about when we consider accountability for other courts in the state. So that takes us through all of our courts. It takes us through the prosecutor, it takes us through the sheriff. We know from Vasily going through the system that other roles that are on our ballot this year are very important too, like the House of Representatives, like the state Senate, like the school board, and also the Michigan boards of education and the governors, and for our universities and the trustees, right? But also that doesn't stop this year. So if you're interested in how your vote influences the justice system, that's also next year, and that's also the following year. So next year, we will vote on our Detroit mayor, on Detroit City Council, and on the Detroit Police Commission. And in 2022, we'll be right back looking at governor, at the state attorney general, at the secretary of state, the state House of Representatives, and there's another school board election. So there are a lot of different offices that really influence the justice system. Today, we focused on the ones that are most closely involved and that are on our ballot this year. And with that, we can take any additional questions there are. I saw the notifications going crazy, so I know you've been in the chat. All right, got a question from Nicole.
I'm just wondering about the one incumbent that's on the ballot for the Supreme Court. So if there's one person on the ballot, oh, I just realized I'm backlit. Sorry about that. If there's one person on the ballot, even if only one person votes for that person, they end up being the judge. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the part that becomes difficult, and I think it's the part that makes it even more important that we get as involved as possible up front, because oftentimes attorneys are concerned about running for office against judges if they'll then have to work in their courts if they lose, right? And so I think the more, while there are definitely roles on this ballot that are unideal because there's only one person running who is an incumbent, I think the more involved we are and the more we move forward talking to folks, we can help to kind of change that moving forward. Are there other questions?
Go ahead, Dominique.
Yeah, okay. Can you guys hear me?
Dominique and Kobe, that is.
Yes, he's my assistant. Is there any resources, particularly for the judges who are on the ballot, where you can see kind of like how judges have ruled in the past that can inform who you vote for, you know?
Right. I saw someone in the chat earlier mention that they've thought about going to judges' courtrooms randomly just to see how they operate, which you can do, by the way. You are able to do that.
You have a long time.
COVID notwithstanding. So those are the kinds of resources that a lot of folks have been working on even more so now to pull together. I mean, you know that from the Citizen Detroit standpoint, we have our informdetroit.org website. We are sending out invitations for people to submit their candidate videos, which we'll post there. But I think that when we talk about how folks can get engaged and the different levels of civic action, to me, that is a gap in our community that it would be wonderful to, see some movement around. How do we evaluate judges? The Bar Association does a scorecard of lawyers and judges, but it's not a scorecard around certain issues, so it might not, if you were thinking about it from a social justice lens, that scorecard might not be as helpful, but it is still a scorecard around their effectiveness and, sorry, another chat came through. There's a scorecard around their effectiveness and how they're rated. The Bar Association rates them.
Yeah, we actually had just a couple more come in. So the first one, I think is an easy one. Does Citizen Detroit have a list of recommendations for candidates for each position?
So Citizen Detroit, we are impartial and we are nonpartisan. So we do not recommend candidates. We don't do endorsements, but we do have our informdetroit.org website where we invite candidates to submit videos telling us about themselves and their policy issues. We just sent those invitations out recently, so we're hoping those videos will come in and we can get them up on the website. Additionally, though, especially with judges, we know there are incumbents running. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can watch candidate videos from previous cycles, and you'll likely see some of those same judges in their older videos.
And then we have from Facebook, a high school government teacher who is joining us and was curious if we had any suggestions about how to make this information especially relevant and important to young people or first-time voters especially, and how to make it less confusing because even very experienced people find the judicial section especially confusing.
Well, I hope that what we went through was relatable and interesting, but I think, part of it is taking it at chunks at a time, and that's part of why we wanted to start at the beginning by looking at a system, and you can kind of explore those different chunks, one by one, and then move up into how they interconnect, I think.
Misha, maybe mention the citizen manual.
Yes, so Citizen Detroit is working on a local civics guide that will be the civics curriculum for DPSCD in the fall, called the Citizen Manual. It'll also be online. It will be citizenmanual.com. That is not a launched website now, but it will be launched by September. I will say though, that within that, you know, it's giving you an intro and walking you through our local government. And so when we think about the courts and the justice system, it's not going to be a deep dive into that area in particular, but there will be content related to it there, and that will be in schools and available to the community.
And good for youth. Yeah, great civic education for youth will be in the citizen manual. So hopefully it can help teachers out there.
All right. So if there are no more questions, then I have a couple reminders for you. And we'll start with how to get engaged on this issue. So yes, we talked a lot about voting, but there are things that you can do tomorrow. There are things that you can do this weekend to connect with our local government and have your voice heard on justice system issues. The first, we talked about Detroit City Council, right? So the City Council approves budgets, right? And so we've gone through our budget process for this year. It'll be the same process next year where there will be public hearings and meetings that you can attend. But the council also has 2 committees that deal with the justice system. The Internal Operations Committee covers the 36th District Court, and the Public Health and Safety Committee covers the Detroit Police Department, as well as the Fire Department and other first responders. Now, those meetings for those 2 committees happen to be this week, and so we have missed them at this point. However, if you go to detroitmi.gov to the City Council page and click on their standing committees, or if you copy down the link that we have here, which will also go in the chat, then you can see the upcoming meetings for all of the standing committees. On the Internal Operations Committee, you've got Councilman McAllister, Councilwoman Castaneda Lopez, and Councilman Tate. On the Public Health and Safety Committee, you've got Councilman Scott Benson, Councilwoman Ayers, and Councilman McAllister. So if you recognize any of those as your council people, yes, attend the committee meeting, but you also can talk to them directly about the issues of these 2 different systems. And as a reminder, Councilwoman Ayers is an at-large councilwoman. So, she represents everyone. She's not in one district. So that's City Council. We also have our Board of Police Commissioners. So this is a board of 11 civilians. 7 are elected from districts. So you actually have, if you live in Detroit, you have a police commissioner who represents you and your district. 4 of these commissioners are appointed by the mayor, and they are charged with the oversight of the Detroit Police Department. So complaints, approving discipline, the chief of police, they work with the chief, all those things. These individuals serve for 5 years at a time. I mentioned they'll be on the ballot next year, but for now, they're meeting every week at 3 p.m. They're meeting on Zoom, just like everyone else. If we ever meet back in person, they'll be at the Detroit Public Safety Headquarters. And then second Thursdays are community meetings. Now those communities are on Zoom. They also have their own page on the DetroitMI.gov website where you can get the link, look at their agendas, and join the meeting. So, you want to check out their meetings, hear what they're talking about. As we talk about these meetings, they're all subject to the Open Meetings Act, which means there is public comment. So there is a formal time for you to have your voice heard. Then we've got the Charter Revision Commission. So that process is still going forward. However, we are running out of time for submitting our recommendations to them. They are accepting recommendations through, it was July, sorry. Deborah, can you type to me what was the exact date?
July 31st.
Thank you. They're accepting recommendations through July 21st for changes to the charter, revisions to the charter. So the Board of Police Commissioners, which we just mentioned, that is a body that's established by our city charter. And the way the charter establishes it is the way folks are submitted, so who's appointed, who's elected. It also establishes the body allowing for former police officers to be appointed or elected to the police commission. And the elected members can have been police officers at any point in time. The appointed members can't have been city employees for 3 years. So if they were on the force and they left, they have 3 years before they can be appointed to the commission. But the elected members don't have that caveat. So if we're looking at the 7 board seats right now, there are 2 who are former law enforcement officers, and there are 2 who are part of Wayne County Sheriff Reserves. So that, you know, that's 4 of the 7. It's not 4 of 7. That's 4 of the 11 because they're. Anyway. So that is what's going on with the police commissioners. If you're interested in that, you know, you could propose a revision to who can be on it. You can propose a revision to how they can be on it. That's all up to you to explore and think about. But you do have to get your proposal in by July 31st. And they have upcoming meetings actually tomorrow and on Saturday. So tomorrow at 5 and Saturday at noon. They have a page on DetroitMI.gov where you can get to their Zoom link and join their meetings, where you can also see their documents. That's also where you can submit your revision request and explore all the things that are going on with the Charter Revision Commission. And then lastly, we've got our Wayne County Commissioners, which someone in the chat asked earlier about who does the budget for the Sheriff's Department and the prosecuting attorney. And so all of that is coming through the Wayne County Commission. The Wayne County Commission is to Wayne County as the city council is to Detroit. So the Wayne County Commission's Public Safety, Judiciary, and Homeland Security Committee is the committee that looks at the sheriff, the prosecuting attorney, community corrections, Homeland Security, and the courts. So they meet every other Wednesday at 11 a.m. Their meeting that was supposed to be today was postponed. They haven't shared a replacement for it, but presumably their next meeting on July 8th will still occur. They are meeting on Zoom. You can get their link on their website at waynecounty.com. Now, the county commission is also elected by districts across the county. So some commissioners represent Detroit, others do not. You know, Martha G. Scott has been representing Detroit for a long time, for example, and she's the vice chair of this committee. Monique Baker McCormick is actually my county commissioner, representing part of Northwest Detroit, and she is on this committee as well. The Wayne County Commission website is really well organized. It's nice. And also they have a YouTube page. If you go on YouTube and search Wayne County Commission, where you can watch their previous meetings and see what you missed. So those are all the ways that you can get engaged right now, right? Literally tomorrow, since that's when the next Charter Revision Commission meeting is. And so beyond that, you know, we can't do all of this without reminding one another that our election is, we have a primary August 4th. That primary will have some of these seats that we've just discussed on them, and many others. In Detroit, given the heavy partisanship, the primary kind of is the election for some seats like State House and State Senate. And then our general election is November 3rd. Everyone can vote absentee now. We have no cause absentee. You should have gotten a letter that invites you to apply for an absentee ballot. We know what these elections have been looking like recently in Georgia and in Kentucky. And so I definitely just encourage folks to kind of think ahead and make sure that your vote gets counted. That is not a shot at any of our Michigan systems. That is just about us making sure that we take care of what we need to take care of and get our vote counted. We also have the census. So if you haven't filled it out, fill it out. If you know someone who hasn't filled it out, get them to fill it out. If you know a grandparent who's raising grandchildren, tell them that the kids count on their census if they live in their house on April 1. If anything like that, get folks to fill out the census. It's really, really important. And then lastly, if you're not already keeping up with us online, please do, share this content with folks. It's really important. We prioritize being a source of good factual information. We want folks to be able to benefit from it. If you follow us on Facebook, change your settings to see first so you can join us for digital dialogues every other Thursday. And that is actually the end of my reminders, but so thank you all so much for being here with us this evening. We really appreciate you. It's so important that you have this dedication to being engaged, to understanding our government. We literally cannot build a better society if we aren't participating in it. And so thank you all so much. We're grateful to you, and we hope you have a wonderful night. See you.